When my grandfather's will was read, everyone in the room was waiting to hear how much money they had inherited. I was waiting too, not because I expected millions. I knew my grandfather loved all of us in different ways, and I had never measured his love by money. But I still believed that somewhere in that old document, there might be a small reminder of him for me. My family received houses, bank accounts, land, investments, and things I could barely understand. My name came last. The lawyer looked at me for a moment and said, "Your grandfather left you a phone number." For a few seconds nobody spoke. Then my older brother laughed. My aunt covered her mouth, but I could see she was smiling. Someone behind me whispered, "A phone number? That's it." I looked down at my hands. I could feel my face getting warm, but I said nothing. The lawyer handed me a small white envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper. There was one phone number written on it in my grandfather's handwriting. Nothing else. No explanation. No name. No amount of money. Just 10 numbers. My brother leaned toward me and smiled. "Well," he said softly, "I guess Grandpa really knew how to make things fair." Everyone laughed again. I didn't. I folded the paper carefully and placed it inside my purse. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen with the number in front of me. I stared at it for almost an hour. I wondered if it was a mistake. Maybe Grandpa had written the wrong number. Maybe it belonged to an old friend. Maybe it was simply his final joke. But something about the way he had written it bothered me. The handwriting was neat, steady, deliberate. My grandfather had not forgotten anything in his life, and he had never been a man who did things without a reason. So at nearly midnight I picked up my phone. I entered the number. My finger hovered over the call button. Then I remembered my grandfather's last words to me. "Don't let them decide what something is worth before you find out for yourself." I pressed call. And the moment someone answered, my entire understanding of my grandfather changed. My grandfather, Thomas Bennett, was the kind of man people noticed even when he was quiet. He wasn't rich when I was growing up. At least none of us thought he was. He lived in a large but simple house at the edge of town. The paint on the outside was old, and the porch needed fixing almost every year. His kitchen had the same wooden cabinets for as long as I could remember. But Grandpa never complained about money. He always said, "A house doesn't need to look expensive to feel like home." I was his youngest grandchild. My brother Daniel was 4 years older than me, and my cousin Rachel was the oldest of the grandchildren. Daniel was always confident. Rachel was always successful, and I was always somewhere in the middle. I wasn't the loudest person in the family. I wasn't the most successful either. I worked hard, paid my bills, and tried to live a quiet life. For some reason, that made people think I didn't have much to offer. Grandpa never saw me that way. When I was little, he used to take me to his workshop on Saturday mornings. He had an old wooden table where he fixed clocks, radios, lamps, and anything else people brought him. I would sit beside him and watch. Sometimes I asked too many questions. He never told me to be quiet. Instead, he would smile and say, "Keep asking. One day you'll understand why." I didn't understand then. I was only 8. I thought Grandpa knew everything. To me, he was the smartest man alive. He could repair almost anything. He knew every road in town. He could remember birthdays without writing them down. And he could tell when someone was lying before they had finished their first sentence. As I grew older, I began noticing something else. Grandpa watched people. Not in a suspicious way. He simply paid attention. He noticed who was kind when nobody was watching. He noticed who only visited when they needed something. He noticed who talked about money. And he noticed who never did. My brother Daniel became very interested in Grandpa's finances when we were teenagers. He never said it directly, but whenever we visited, Daniel would ask questions. "How much is the house worth now? Did you ever sell that land? Do you still have those old investments?" Grandpa would usually smile. "Why do you need to know?" Daniel would laugh. "I'm just curious." Grandpa would shake his head. "Curiosity is good. Greed is expensive." At the time I thought he was joking. Years later I understood exactly what he meant. As we got older, the family changed. Daniel became successful. He bought a large house. He drove an expensive car. He started talking about investments and business deals. Rachel became a lawyer and married a successful businessman. Everyone seemed proud of them, and they deserved to be proud. But slowly, family gatherings started feeling different. People no longer talked about memories. They talked about property. They talked about money. They talked about what Grandpa might eventually leave behind. I tried not to listen. Whenever the conversation moved in that direction, I went into the kitchen and helped with the dishes. Grandpa noticed. One evening while everyone was sitting in the living room, he found me washing plates. "You always hide in here," he said. I smiled. "They talk about things I don't understand." Grandpa dried his hands with a towel. "You understand more than you think." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He leaned against the counter. "People reveal themselves when they think nobody is paying attention." I didn't know what to say. Then he smiled. "Come sit with me." We went onto the porch. It was cold that evening. The street was quiet. Grandpa looked toward the road. "Promise me something." "What?" "If you ever feel like everyone else got something and you got nothing, don't make a decision while you're hurt." I laughed softly. "Why would I ever feel that way?" He looked at me. "You might." I didn't understand. I thought he was talking about life in general. I never imagined he was preparing me for the day his will would be read. Grandpa became weaker during the last year of his life. He stopped working in the workshop. His hands were no longer as steady. He started using a cane. But his mind remained sharp. I visited him twice a week. Sometimes I brought groceries. Sometimes I cooked. Sometimes we just sat in silence. Those were my favorite visits. We didn't need to talk all the time. I could sit at his kitchen table while he read the newspaper. He could drink his tea while I answered emails. It felt normal, comfortable, like nothing had changed. One afternoon I found him looking through an old box. "What are you searching for?" I asked. "Something important." "Can I help?" He shook his head. "No. I need you to remember something instead." I smiled. "What's that?" He looked at me for a long moment. "Never assume the person holding the most is the person who has been given the most." I laughed. "You're speaking in riddles again." "Maybe." Then he reached into the box and pulled out an old photograph. It showed him when he was young. He was standing beside another man. I had never seen the man before. "Who's that?" Grandpa looked at the photograph. "My oldest friend." "What happened to him?" Grandpa's expression changed. "He disappeared from my life many years ago." "Why?" "Because we made one bad decision." He put the photograph away. I wanted to ask more, but I didn't. I had learned that Grandpa would tell me things when he was ready. A few weeks later he gave me a small envelope. I thought it was a birthday card. Instead he said, "Don't open this until I'm gone." I looked at him. "That's creepy." He laughed. "Maybe." "What is it?" "Something you may need." I placed it in my bag. I almost opened it that night. But I didn't. I kept my promise. When Grandpa died, the entire family gathered at his house. The funeral was quiet. There were flowers everywhere. People told stories. Neighbors came. Old friends came. Some people cried. Others talked about how much Grandpa had helped them over the years. I listened, and I realized something. Most of the people who came didn't talk about his money. They talked about his kindness. One woman said Grandpa had fixed her heating system when she couldn't afford a repairman. An old man said Grandpa had paid his rent one winter. A former employee said Grandpa had helped him start a business. I had never heard any of these stories. My family hadn't either. At least they pretended not to. After the funeral, everyone started talking about the will. Daniel asked when it would be read. Rachel wanted to know whether the lawyer had all the documents. My aunt asked if the house was being sold. I stayed quiet. Part of me felt uncomfortable. Grandpa had been gone for less than a week. But the family was already dividing his life into numbers. The lawyer scheduled the reading for Friday. We all gathered in a conference room. There were 7 of us. Daniel sat beside Rachel. My aunt sat across from me. I chose a chair near the end of the table. The lawyer opened the folder. He began reading. Grandpa left the house to Daniel. There was a small silence. Daniel smiled. Then came the land. Rachel received that. Then the investments. Several accounts were divided among family members. Then came the bank accounts. More money. More smiles. More quiet calculations. I listened. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I knew Grandpa had his reasons. Then the lawyer said my name. Everyone looked at me. I straightened in my chair. The lawyer paused. Then he said, "To my granddaughter Emma Bennett I leave the following." He looked down. My heart started beating faster. He read slowly. One phone number. I thought I had misunderstood him. "I'm sorry." The lawyer repeated it. One phone number. Daniel laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh. It was worse. It was the kind of laugh someone gives when they think you are foolish. My aunt whispered, "That's strange." Rachel smiled. The lawyer handed me the envelope. "Your grandfather specifically instructed me to give this to you." I opened it. The paper was folded once. I unfolded it. There it was. The number. Written in Grandpa's handwriting. I knew it immediately. My throat tightened. Daniel leaned back. "So that's your inheritance?" I didn't answer. He laughed again. "Maybe Grandpa left you a pizza place." Rachel smiled. "Or maybe it's the number of someone who owes him money." The room laughed. I forced a small smile. But inside something was hurting. Not because I wanted millions. Because I knew Grandpa. And I knew he would never humiliate me for no reason. There had to be something behind that number. I folded the paper. Put it away. And I said nothing. That evening I went home alone. The house felt strangely quiet. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table. The envelope was beside me. I opened it again. The number was still there. I checked the handwriting. It was definitely Grandpa's. I tried searching the number online. Nothing. I tried entering it into my contacts. Nothing. I wondered if it belonged to someone I already knew. Maybe it was an old business contact. Maybe a lawyer. Maybe a friend. I almost called. Then I stopped. I could hear Daniel's voice in my head. "So that's your inheritance?" I felt embarrassed. I hated that. I hated feeling embarrassed by something Grandpa had chosen for me. So I waited. For several hours. Then midnight came. I picked up my phone. I dialed. 1 ring. 2. 3. Then someone answered. A man's voice said, "Hello." I froze. "Hello." The voice came again. "Who is this?" I swallowed. "My name is Emma." There was silence. Then I said, "I was given this number by my grandfather." The line went completely quiet. For a moment I thought the call had dropped. Then the man whispered something I will never forget. "Thomas is dead?" My heart stopped. "Yes." Another silence. Then he said, "I was afraid this day would come." I sat up. "Who are you?" He took a slow breath. "My name is Henry." I didn't recognize the name. Then he said, "Your grandfather told me that if you ever called, I was supposed to tell you the truth." I stared at the wall. "What truth?" Henry said, "Your grandfather didn't leave your family millions." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "The money you saw in that will was only part of what he owned." I couldn't speak. Henry continued, "Your grandfather spent most of his life building something nobody in your family knew about." I felt cold. "What did he build?" Henry answered quietly, "A foundation." Henry and I spoke for nearly 2 hours that night. He told me he had known Grandpa for more than 30 years. They had worked together. Not in the way I imagined. Grandpa had created a private foundation that helped families who had fallen into financial trouble. It paid school fees, medical bills, rent, business costs, emergency expenses. But Grandpa had never put his own name on it. Henry said that was why nobody in the family knew. He didn't want people helping others because they wanted something from him. I asked, "Why didn't he tell me?" Henry paused. "He trusted you." I looked down. "That's not an answer." "It is." Henry told me Grandpa had watched all of us carefully over the years. He knew who asked about money. He knew who visited only when they needed something. He knew who cared about him. And he knew I was the only one who never asked what I would receive after his death. That made me uncomfortable. I didn't want to believe my family was greedy. But I couldn't deny what I had seen. Henry continued, "There is more." I waited. "Your grandfather left instructions." "For me?" "Yes." "What instructions?" Henry said, "He wanted you to meet me." "When?" Tomorrow morning. I looked at the clock. It was almost 2 in the morning. Where? He gave me an address. It was an old office building across town. Before ending the call, Henry said something else. Emma, don't tell your family about this yet. Why? Because your grandfather believed some people would try to take control of everything once they knew. I thought about Daniel. I thought about Rachel. Then I understood why Grandpa had given me a phone number instead of money. The number wasn't the gift. It was the key. The next morning, I drove to the address Henry had given me. The building looked ordinary. There was no large sign. No expensive office. Just an old brick building with a small metal door. Henry opened it. He was in his 70s. Gray hair. Thin glasses. Kind eyes. The moment he saw me, he smiled sadly. You look like your grandfather. I almost cried. Everyone had said that before. But hearing it from someone who had known Grandpa for decades felt different. He led me upstairs. The office was small. There were shelves full of folders. Photographs covered one wall. Families. Children. Graduations. Businesses. Homes. People smiling. I recognized Grandpa in some of the pictures. But he wasn't standing in the center. He was usually in the background, helping someone, holding a box, shaking a hand, sitting beside an old woman. I touched one photograph. Why did I never know? Henry smiled. Because your grandfather wanted it that way. Then he handed me a folder. Inside was a letter. My name was written on the front. My hand started shaking. I opened it. Grandpa had written, Emma, if you are reading this, then you have already seen what I left the others. Do not feel sorry for yourself. Do not compare your inheritance to theirs. And do not let money decide how you remember me. I left you a number because I wanted you to discover something. You have always had the heart I hoped someone in our family would have. Now I need to know if you will use it. I stopped reading. Tears filled my eyes. Henry gave me time. When I continued, Grandpa explained everything. The foundation had enough money to operate for many years. But he wanted someone from the family to take responsibility for it. He had chosen me. Not because I was the smartest. Not because I was the richest. But because I had never asked him for anything. At the bottom of the letter he wrote, Your family may think you received nothing. Let them think that for a while. Sometimes the person who looks poor is the person holding the greatest responsibility. I closed my eyes. For the first time since the will reading I smiled. Not because I had money. Because Grandpa had trusted me. Over the next few weeks I learned more about the foundation. It was much larger than I expected. There were accounts, properties, investments, partnerships. But the money wasn't simply sitting there. It was being used. Every month Henry and a small team helped families. One family needed money to keep their home. Another needed help with the child's education. A small restaurant needed equipment after a fire. An elderly couple needed medical support. I realized my grandfather had spent decades quietly changing people's lives. And my family had never known. One afternoon, Henry showed me the financial records. I was shocked. The amount was far greater than the inheritance my family had received. I stared at the numbers. Why didn't Grandpa leave this to the family? Henry looked at me. Because he knew what would happen. I didn't answer. He continued. He didn't want the foundation broken apart and sold piece by piece. I understood. Grandpa had protected it. And he had protected me by hiding it. But then Henry said something that made me nervous. Your brother has already called. I looked at him. What? He wants information about the estate. How does he know? He doesn't know everything. Does he know about this place? Henry shook his head. Not yet. That night Daniel called me. His voice sounded friendly. Too friendly. Hey Emma. How are you doing? I'm fine. I was thinking about Grandpa. So was I. He paused. About that number. My stomach tightened. What about it? Did you ever find out what it was? I stayed quiet. Emma. No. He laughed. You know, I think Grandpa was messing with you. Maybe. It's strange though. What is? He never liked giving people things without a reason. I looked at the folder on my desk. Maybe there was a reason. Daniel became quiet. Then he said, "If you find anything, let me know." "I will." He hung up. I sat there for a long time. I knew he suspected something. A few days later, the family gathered at my aunt's house. Daniel was there. Rachel was there. Everyone was talking about the estate. I sat quietly. Daniel looked at me. "So Emma, any news from your mystery number?" Everyone smiled. I shook my head. "Nothing." He laughed. "Still nothing." "Still nothing." Rachel said, "Maybe Grandpa wanted to teach you a lesson about expectations." I looked at her. "What lesson?" She shrugged. "That not everyone gets a big inheritance." I nodded. "You're right." Daniel smiled. "Good. At least you understand." I took a sip of water. I wanted to tell them. I wanted to say, "You have no idea." But Grandpa's letter stopped me. He had asked me not to reveal everything too soon. So I stayed quiet. That night I realized something important. Silence wasn't weakness. Sometimes silence was patience. And sometimes patience gave people enough time to show you who they really were. The pressure grew over the next month. Daniel started asking more questions. He wanted to know whether Grandpa had other accounts. He asked whether I had spoken to the lawyer. He even asked whether the phone number belonged to a business. I always gave the same answer. "I don't know." That was not exactly a lie. There were still many things I didn't know. But I was learning. Henry showed me more documents. Grandpa had prepared everything carefully. He had also included one final condition. I could only control the foundation if I agreed to run it for at least 5 years. I asked Henry why. He smiled. "Your grandfather wanted to know whether you were willing to serve people without expecting anything back." I laughed quietly. He really knew how to test people. Henry smiled. "Yes." The 5-year condition scared me. I had a normal job, a normal life. I wasn't prepared to run a foundation. But every time I visited, I saw another reason to continue. I met a mother whose son had been able to stay in school because of Grandpa. I met an elderly man who called Grandpa his guardian angel. I met a young woman who had started a small business with help from the foundation. None of them knew Grandpa had left it to me. And that made the responsibility feel even bigger. Then something happened that changed everything. I received a call from the lawyer. He asked me to come to his office. When I arrived, he looked serious. He placed a document on the table. "This was included with your grandfather's estate instructions." I read it. It was a letter addressed to the entire family. But there was one part that stood out. Grandpa had written, "I know some of you will believe I treated Emma unfairly. You may think she received the least. That is not true. She received the one thing I believe matters most. A chance to decide what kind of person she will become when nobody is watching." I read that sentence several times. Then the lawyer said, "There is another page." He handed it to me. It listed the foundation, its assets, its purpose, and my name. I stared at the document. Then I realized something. Grandpa had planned for the truth to become public. He just wanted me to be ready first. The lawyer said, "Your family will receive this letter tomorrow." My heart sank. What will happen? They will know. I drove home feeling sick. Not because I was afraid of the money. I was afraid of what the truth would do to my family. The next evening, everyone gathered again. The lawyer read Grandpa's letter. Nobody spoke. Daniel's face changed. Rachel stopped smiling. My aunt looked at me. The lawyer explained the foundation. He explained that its assets were separate from the family inheritance. He explained that Grandpa had chosen me to manage it. Then Daniel finally spoke. "So she gets everything?" The lawyer shook his head. "No." Daniel looked confused. "She gets control of the foundation. That money is not hers personally. It must be used according to your grandfather's instructions." Daniel looked at me. "So you don't actually own it?" "No." For the first time he looked relieved. Then Rachel asked, "Why her?" The lawyer answered simply, "Your grandfather chose her." Daniel shook his head. "That doesn't make sense." I said nothing. The lawyer handed me another envelope. "This is for you." I opened it. Another letter. Grandpa's handwriting. I read it silently. "Emma, they may be angry. Let them be. They may accuse you. Stay calm. They may try to make you feel guilty. Remember why you were chosen. Do not use what I built to punish them. Use it to help people. That will be your answer. I folded the letter. I looked at my family, and for the first time I felt no need to prove anything. Daniel came to my house 3 days later. He looked tired. He sat at my kitchen table. I was wrong, he said. I didn't answer immediately. He looked down. I thought Grandpa didn't respect you. I asked why. Because you were always the quiet one. I smiled sadly. He respected quiet people. Daniel nodded. I know that now. He looked around the kitchen. Can I ask you something? Yes. Did you know? No. He seemed surprised. You really didn't? No. He nodded slowly. I thought you were hiding something from us. I was following Grandpa's instructions. He sighed. I don't know how to feel. You don't have to decide today. He looked at me. Are you angry with me? I thought about it. A little. He nodded. I understand. Then he said something I didn't expect. I wish I had spent more time with Grandpa. That was the first time I saw my brother cry. Not because of money, because he realized he had lost time he could never buy back. I reached across the table. He took my hand. We sat there quietly. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't begin with an apology. Sometimes it begins when two people finally stop pretending they weren't hurt. Months passed. I left my old job. I became involved with the foundation full-time. It was difficult. There were mistakes. There were long days. There were decisions that kept me awake at night. But I never forgot Grandpa. I kept his phone number in a small frame on my desk. Not because it was valuable, because it reminded me of the night everything changed. Henry remained beside me. He taught me everything. How to review requests. How to check records. How to protect the foundation. How to say no when someone was trying to take advantage. And most importantly, how to help without making people feel small. I began visiting some of the families myself. I learned their names. I listened to their stories. I realized something Grandpa had understood long before me. Money could solve a problem, but kindness could restore someone's dignity. A year after Grandpa died, we held a small gathering at the foundation. No reporters. No big event. Just the people we had helped and a few staff members. Daniel came. Rachel came too. My aunt came. For the first time, we weren't there because of Grandpa's estate. We were there because of what he had built. I stood in front of everyone. I didn't give a long speech. I simply said, my grandfather taught me that the value of a gift isn't measured by its size. It's measured by what it allows us to do for others. Then I looked at my family. Daniel smiled. Rachel nodded. And I felt something inside me become peaceful. Grandpa had been right. The number had never been the inheritance. The number had been an invitation. An invitation to discover who he really was. And who he believed I could become. Years later, I still remember that night. The conference room. The lawyer's voice. The laughter. The envelope. The 10 numbers written on a small piece of paper. For a long time, my family thought I had received the smallest gift. But I learned something that day. Sometimes the most important gifts don't look like gifts at all. Sometimes they look like a responsibility. Sometimes they look like a question. Sometimes they look like a phone number. And sometimes you have to be brave enough to dial it. I never became rich from Grandpa's foundation. That was never the point. I became something else. I became someone who understood why he had trusted me. I learned that wealth isn't only about what you can keep. It is also about what you can give. I learned that family can hurt you without realizing how deeply. And I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means deciding that what happened will not control who you become. Daniel and I became closer after Grandpa's death. Not perfect. Not like when we were children. But closer. He still talks too much about money sometimes. I still tell him when he's being ridiculous. And sometimes we sit together and remember Grandpa. Rachel changed too. She started volunteering with the foundation. My aunt became one of our regular supporters. None of us forgot what happened, but we stopped allowing it to divide us. And every year on the anniversary of Grandpa's death, I take out that little piece of paper. The number is faded now. The edges are soft. I keep it in the same drawer where I keep his letters. Sometimes I look at it and smile, because I remember how everyone laughed. I remember how small I felt, and I remember the moment someone answered, "Thomas is dead?" Those words opened a door I didn't know existed. Behind that door was my grandfather's hidden life. But more importantly, behind that door was the lesson he wanted me to learn. Never judge what something is worth by what it looks like. Never assume someone has nothing simply because they received less. And never let another person's laughter make you ashamed of something that carries meaning. My grandfather knew that. He also knew something about me that I didn't know about myself. He knew I could carry something bigger than money. He knew I could carry trust. And that became the greatest inheritance of my life. So when I think about that day now, I don't remember the millions. I don't remember the houses. I don't remember who got what. I remember a small piece of paper, 10 numbers, a quiet room, a grandfather who knew me better than I knew myself, and one phone call that changed everything. Sometimes life gives us answers in strange ways. Sometimes the answer doesn't arrive in a box. It doesn't come with a ribbon. It may not even look valuable. Sometimes it arrives as something so ordinary that everyone else laughs at it. But if your heart tells you there is more to discover, listen. Because the thing everyone else ignores may be the very thing that changes your life. And sometimes, all you have to do is make the call.